Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the series where we take privacy-enhancing technologies out of the abstract and show how they're being used in the real world. Welcome to Pets in Practice. Many of you have probably heard the term pets a lot lately, but for many teams, it still isn't exactly obvious what pets do or how they fit into day-to-day business. The truth is that pets are already all around us, and without knowing it, you're probably using them every day when you browse online, use your phone, engage in various services, or if you're a user of the technology today's guest builds, which I'm sure you are, Miguel Guevara from a little company called Google. Companies like Google are showing just how approachable these technologies are, letting consumers and businesses analyze data without moving it, collaborate in ways they never thought they could, and securely and privately leverage AI. In this series, we're breaking it down. We'll look at what's pushing pets into mainstream adoption, the rise of secure AI, the pressure to get more value from data, and an ecosystem that's mature enough to make pets straightforward to roll out. And we'll hear from people who are already using them in production and learn what worked, what didn't, and what's now possible. If you're looking for better, faster, safer ways to collaborate and innovate with sensitive data, you've come to the right place. So today we're diving into a company you have probably interacted with dozens of times a day for almost 30 years, Google. You've used Google Search, Google Maps, Gemini, Google Ads, and anything else that are part of a never-ending list of innovative applications that Google constantly releases. But what you might not know is what's happening behind the scenes to make insights available to you while protecting privacy. And that's where Miguel comes in. Miguel is a product manager leading much of the privacy technology work at Google, especially around differential privacy. I was actually on a panel with Miguel a couple of years ago, and he really blew my mind with the things he was working on. And I actually paused the panel in real time just to reflect on the things Miguel was sharing. So I'm super excited to learn what he's been cooking up in the years since, and can't wait to jump in. Miguel, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Ron.
So when people think about Google, they think about search and Chrome and Maps. They're not thinking about privacy enhancing technologies. Can you share what you and your team focus on and why it's strategically important to Google?
Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. So, first of all, our focus is on developing privacy enhancing technologies and making them available internally and externally. The reason why we focus on that is because we start from this security paradigm where people in security have this notion that only experts should be developing security mechanisms for wide use. And the reason for that is because there are many landmines when you're developing security mechanisms in the same way that happens with privacy enhancing technologies. So our reason for existence is to try to bring together a set of experts from academia, from computer science to develop some of these solutions that can be widely used both internally and externally at Google. We do a lot of open sourcing, and our goal is to share a lot of our insights and a lot of our learnings with the community so that everyone can benefit from this. In terms of why this is strategical, I think that since 2016 or 17, privacy has been more top of mind for a lot of people. And one of the biggest challenges with privacy is that I guess there are two ways of addressing privacy. The first one is through these heuristic slash policy privacy or through mathematical means. The first one, I think, is necessary because it addresses a lot of the concerns that people have. But I think it's also very contextual with regards to the moment of time in which we live. And it doesn't really address future uses of the technology and protecting privacy in a meaningful way. Whereas privacy enhancing technologies, a lot of them are based on math and they provide very rigorous guarantees on how much information is being leaked or how much protection is being provided to a single user or to a group of users. And I think this is different because by having this very rigorous analytical framework, we are able to provide users with very strong privacy guarantees that we are confident will stand the test of time better than the heuristic and policy approach.
Incredible, very interesting. And given that, and at a company operating at Google scale, what are the most important problems that you're trying to solve? What's already out there that's using pets, and what are you working on right now?
I think some of the biggest problems I would try to address is how to use sensitive or potentially sensitive data in a way that respects user privacy, but also provides societal value. I think the prime example of that was when we worked on the mobility reports in 2020 during COVID. There was clear societal benefit because policymakers were trying to understand how were people moving during these harsh times. And Google was uniquely positioned to provide that information, mostly because a lot of users opt in to share their location in real time with Google. But there was, of course, this fear that we had that if we were to share location in a naive way through these reports, the data could be used in nefarious ways. And that's why we relied on differential privacy, because differential privacy provides us a very robust analytical framework through which we could think about the potential attacks that could be done against the data. And we decided to use differential privacy on that way. In terms of looking at the future, AI is, of course, top of mind. So we're trying to figure out how to address some of these AI use cases with privacy enhancing technologies. It's generally hard because when you try to train a model with a privacy enhancing technology, the cost increases significantly. And that is challenging because training these models is already expensive. So there's very little appetite to increase the training cost because of privacy enhancing technologies. However, we're trying to think from the other side of the equation, meaning if we cannot provide robust and analytical guarantees, privacy guarantees to the model, then can we just measure whatever guarantees the model currently has? And we started that work very early on, probably 7 years ago, to try to attack models and perform some measurements, mainly memorization measurements on the models. And that started on the ML world, but now we're trying to move on to the Gen AI world. So we're trying to figure out how to best assess what are the privacy risks on some Gen AI models to better understand, to give practitioners a better idea on how to conceptually think about these risks in the Gen AI era.
Very interesting. We have a practical example of using differential privacy to solve, let's say, insight sharing around location data. And where you see things are going is obviously the buzzword today is generative AI. What are the privacy guarantees that you already have in Gen AI, and what more could you add to it? Is that a fair way
Yeah,
to summarize? Very
yeah, that's
interesting.
correct.
And without getting too technical, and we've already thrown out a few privacy enhancing technology terms, without getting too technical, how are you using pets today? What is differential privacy actually doing for you? Or what are the other privacy technologies actually doing for you? And what does that translate to in terms of value to your end users, like the consumers or your business customers or your partners?
Yeah, so for instance, one of the techniques that we use is differential privacy. And in a nutshell, differential privacy prevents the leakage of information or quantifies the leakage of information. For instance, in a very basic example, you can imagine that if you have a zip code, the entire zip code, there's perfect amount of information as to what area of the world you live. But let's say if you remove the first 3 digits of the zip code, then there's less information. And that's a way to limit information leakage. Differential privacy uses a mechanism known as adding uncertainty or randomness or noise, whatever you want to call it, into the data, so that it makes it harder for someone who is looking at the data to actually figure out what in the data is true and what it's not true. It's a principle that's called plausible deniability. It actually goes back to the 60s or 70s when some social scientists were doing some surveys to try to figure out what was the prevalence of certain diseases on a population, but people were not willing to answer truthfully. So they used this mechanism whereby they threw a coin and people were free to either tell the truth or not. But more importantly, the researchers never knew the outcome of the coin flipping, and they never knew whether the answer that the respondent was given was true or not. But it turns out that the math works out such that at a populational level, you can answer questions as to how prevalent is a certain disease on a population, but you cannot pinpoint as to who has the disease within that population. So that's generally how differential privacy works. We use it in several internal products. Most of our clients are internal teams. Google Maps uses it pretty heavily. Their Google Trends also uses it a lot. Some teams in ads are also use differential privacy. I also work on fully homomorphic encryption, which is this idea that you can process data in an encrypted manner so that it never has to be decrypted. And the example that I give people is that, say that you issue a query asking Google, what's the weather today? The query travels to the server, and it's processed in the server, but Google never knows what actually you were asking. And then it returns an answer to that question or that query, but Google, again, cannot see the answer to that question. And that's very promising because it really upends the way that we think about data. It really brings back ownership of the data and control of the data to the end user. And that's more of an early stage. And we have a lot of partners in academia and the industry. We partner very closely with them because our goal is to further this field. It's a very new field. The first paper was published 14 or 15 years ago. There's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of promise, but the computational costs are very high. So our focus is to work with this industry and academic partners on finding ways of reducing that cost to make it more tenable for regular day-to-day applications and ourselves, of course, to use it. In our case, it's a little bit challenging because every service that we have has hundreds of millions of users, and FHE currently comes with a significant overhead. So adding FHE to any of our services comes up with a significant cost. But our goal there is to try to advance the field. And the third one is federated learning. We do a lot of federated learning at Google. I'm not as close to that development. Again, our main clients are a lot of internal clients, but we also have external partnerships with other companies that are interested in leveraging federated learning.
Interesting. So you're using a suite of privacy technologies, maybe predominantly internal today, but a little bit external as well. What's the ultimate return on investment or the value that the end users are getting from this? How do you know, as the provider of these technologies or these methodologies, that your users are getting value and getting something out of it?
I think it comes down to the popularity of some of these features and the usage that some of these features have based on privacy. And one thing that I think it's important to remember, there's this researcher who works at Facebook. His name is Ilya Mironov, and he previously worked at Google. And he always used to tell me that we should try to advance privacy in terms of features that become available as a result of privacy. And I think that goes back to your question about what's the value and what's the ROI. There's a lot of features that we currently have that use differential privacy and federated learning that I think couldn't exist otherwise without these privacy technologies because of the precise requirements that they have. One very popular feature in Maps is how busy is this neighborhood or this restaurant. That's a feature that I know I rely a lot on. I know a lot of people rely a lot on before they go to a restaurant or to a bar. And there's clear user value because you just keep going to that feature. And similar to Google Trends, recently, when we added differential privacy, we were able to then provide more granular information on different locales that previously didn't have as much insights in Google Trends. And that's real benefit for some of the users of that data. A lot of them are journalists who are giving back to their community by informing their community on the latest trends. So I think that the ROI that we see has to do a lot with understanding what are these user needs and what are these user features that we can develop in a privacy preserving way while providing clear value to the community.
That's really interesting. And actually, the panel that I referenced, it was exactly the busyness feature that you were talking on Google Maps that I was like, what is this? And that brings me to a question. So I learned from you that Google is using privacy enhancing technologies behind the scenes. Do you see on the whole that your users, your consumers realize that they're using pets? How do you communicate that to them, to your partners, developers, and so on?
Yeah, I don't think the majority of users know that we're using pets, and I think that's by design. We've run a few user testing surveys, and I remember sitting in one of them when we were trying to explain differential privacy to a user, and we were playing with the wording, whether to use randomness, whether to use noise, whether to use scrambling the data. But in every iteration, it just created so much confusion on people. Like when the sole concept of noise is very poorly understood. So when people read like that their data was being noised, they didn't really understand it. Randomness, when we explained it through randomness, it seemed to be like people were able to grasp the concept better. However, a lot of it led to fear. So what people thought was that their data somehow, their personal data, their Gmail was being randomly changed. So they were not so excited about it. And to me, that was a realization that the field of privacy, especially privacy enhancing technologies, is very far away from cryptography. Because cryptography is a complicated concept. I don't know how many people know about prime numbers and multiplying prime numbers and using keys, but I feel that cryptography has reached a point in the vernacular where people associate cryptography with safety. They know that if things are encrypted, they're protected. And that jump is not yet made on privacy. And my hypothesis is that it just has to do with time. Cryptography has been around for 20 or 30 years, or whatever, in the public discourse, whereas privacy enhancing technologies have not been there for much. So a lot of our efforts are centered on participating in industry conferences like the one where I met you, Ronen, or other academic conferences to try to share with people what are the latest developments that Google has been pursuing with privacy enhancing technologies. And our hypothesis is that knowledge eventually will percolate down to the users. But again, our goal is not to directly communicate with the users on how our privacy enhancing technology is being used on a specific product or feature.
It's really interesting. Just to provide a counterpoint, obviously Duality is less focused on B2C and more on B2G, B2B. And I would say that there is a good understanding in particularly in security circles and whatnot around privacy. Obviously, there's still learning that needs to be done, but it seems like a smaller delta than what you've experienced. And I suspect, obviously, you have a different scale, right? And your end user is me, right? And many other people. So I completely understand why it's a different communication challenge and a perception challenge, which I think is the core of what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's given that, and also given, what you're working on today, where do you see pets evolving over the next few years? Which use cases will move from experimental to standard, and which are quietly going to be in the mainstream? And I say quietly because it seems like you've quietly put a lot of privacy technologies in many of your offerings. So where else do you expect to see this, either from Google or just in the general ecosystem?
To answer that question, I'll take a small detour. About 10 years ago, I was reading Nick Bostrom's book on superintelligence, and he was describing the different waves of AI and how AI had entered different winters. And I feel that right now, to answer your question, we're probably on a pet's winter, and that might not be a very popular opinion. At least internally, what I've seen at Google is that there was a huge impetus in around 2016 or 18 for obvious reasons to add privacy proactively to a lot of products. I think that as AI has taken hold of the world, that case is harder to make, mostly because people are running at full speed to try to develop Gen AI features. So I think that at the moment, what I see internally is this period of reflection to try to be more strategic as to where should we take our privacy developments. It's also an opportunity to reflect more on what kind of research is needed and take a step back and really go back to first principles and understand where should the field be going in the next few years and what are these new innovations that should happen. So I think in a nutshell, I don't have a strong answer to you, but on the other hand, we continue advocating for privacy enhancing technologies internally with different teams. There's, especially on the ads world, there's a lot of interest from different advertisers to share or to combine data using some cryptographic methods or to share data with other third parties with some differential privacy. So we're seeing some of that. And I think that we also in the Gen AI world will continue working with some of the researchers internally that we have in Google DeepMind or externally in academia to better understand what are the best ways of assessing privacy in the Gen AI world. My dream is that the privacy evaluations are shown to the developer at the same time as a regular model evaluation, so that people have a better idea of how their model is doing in terms of privacy, and the privacy becomes baked into the flow and understanding of the qualities of these Gen AI models. I think in on that sense, we also need to figure out what are the intersections between privacy and what model developers care about. Initially, what we've seen is that memorization measurements relate very well with how much is the model overfitting, and a lot of the times people don't want the model to overfit too much. So we're trying to find those intersections to make sure that we can tag along this Gen AI train. But I think that in terms of flashy integrations with some of our products, I don't expect some of them to happen in the next year or two. I'll be surprised, but you can rest assured that we continue working on it, and we're taking a step back to think about this from first principles, because there's going to be, and the pendulum is going to swing back, and this privacy winter will eventually end, and there will be a thaw, and we'll again, I'm sure, we'll be rushing to provide privacy solutions because some sort of fire that emerges and society comes back to privacy as a P0. But in the meantime, I think it's a good time to reflect and think carefully and strategically as to where should we take pets in the next few years.
That's really interesting, and I'm surprised to hear you make that point because it seems like it does make sense to stop and take stock, particularly because this amazing, relatively new technology of generative AI is out there and is gaining mass appeal. And I can completely understand why you're saying, okay, let's take a step back and figure out how to think about privacy in this new world, if you will. Not to mention agentic AI and every other sort of buzzword around AI that's there. At the same time, a few minutes ago, you said that there's many features that couldn't exist without pets, right? So it seems like there is value that end users are getting and can continue to get, but you're coming at it from we're at this point in time where there's a big change in the world and we need to take a step back and see what that looks like. Am I understanding your approach to this in the right way, or do you
Yes,
have a
no,
different perspective?
no, that's correct. And one of the things that I would add is that I would say that to complement the answer is that a lot of these teams that we've worked in the past, like the Maps team or other teams, their P0 nowadays is to integrate Gen AI. So most of the engineers that they have are developed to working on the Gen AI. So there's less bandwidth to proactively figure out what's the next feature that we're going to be adding using privacy. So that's also why, for us as a central team within Google, is challenging to push new privacy preserving features, mostly because a lot of the teams are mostly thinking about Gen AI, which is why I was mentioning that we have to figure out what's the way that we can tag along on this train that's moving at full speed and won't stop for the foreseeable future. To also, I think now a lot of the onus is on us as privacy practitioners to figure out how can we actually provide value to this fast moving train without stopping it, because that's also something that people are very cognizant about. They don't want any friction, and a lot of people associate privacy with friction. So we also need to figure out what's the way in which we can provide value, which is why I was hinting at the memorization evaluations, because I feel that if we can just provide those for free to model developers, it's a way in which we are providing value, providing insights to these Gen AI practitioners without any measurable friction.
Yeah, I think that was a really interesting vision that you also laid out around just like you're getting the attributes of how the model works and the weights and the measures, bake privacy into that as well and show that too. I think that's a great vision and makes a lot of sense, particularly as we move more in the world of from training these models to actual inference. And Gemini is probably used, what, billions of times a day already as inference. We still see organizations self-censoring what they're asking of these models because of these privacy concerns and security. And that really resonates with me and jives with how I view the world. So yeah, I just found that an interesting point. I want to move forward and given where you are in this moment of self-reflection, let's say, but also being able to reflect on successes of the past around the pandemic and new features with privacy technologies. For organizations today, that are either thinking about how can they use generative AI safely and securely, or if they're looking for innovation or growth or cost efficiencies, how do you think that they could use pets to move faster and safer? And what's your advice for someone starting on the path?
Yeah, I think I would go back to this point of privacy as an enabler. I think that one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is that they want to add pets to a process or a product just because it sounds fun to add pets to it. And I would say that's the wrong framework. Probably they will find a lot of pitfalls. I think that the best way of thinking about pets for someone who's trying to use them is to think about things that couldn't be done otherwise without these privacy enhancing technologies. So, for instance, I know that in the medical world, there's a lot of value for hospitals to share medical records between different hospitals, but obviously that has a lot of privacy concerns. That's probably something that wouldn't fly with regulators, but maybe, I don't know, if data is encrypted and not accessible to anyone, but the insights of this combined data are shared with everyone in a way that's not sensitive, maybe that's a way in which the medical field can advance some insights about cancer patients or whatever type of patients that require this cumulative aggregation of insights. So I think that if I were someone trying to use pets, I would try to think about things that cannot be done with in the current framework because of regulatory reasons or privacy concerns, and then try to reach out to the community. You guys at Duality have been doing a great job. There's some researchers at Harvard who also work on this. There's a very vibrant privacy community, and I think that the privacy community is really willing to help people who are coming into this field to try to bootstrap some privacy efforts. So I would definitely encourage people out there to reach out to us. You can find us on our GitHub. We have a GitHub within the Google directory for differential privacy. You can reach out to us. If we don't have the answer, we'll try to point you to someone who might be able and willing to help.
Fantastic. Miguel, I really have enjoyed this conversation. I think that we've framed the world at not even a crossroads, but let's say an inflection point where there's new technologies and we need to figure out how do we consider security and privacy in this new world in order to your point, to use it as an enabler, not just for the sake of it. In your thinking about your organization, how you're going to use generative AI or how you're seeking growth or efficiencies, how does privacy and how does security contribute to that? And I really appreciate your thoughts and your philosophical musings on it. Thank you very much for your time. It's fantastic to hear from you and to see you, and to you and to the audience. Have a great rest of the day.
Likewise, thank you very much for having me. I had a great time.